Bored in Butler County? Need to know where to catch a show this weekend? What events are even happening in the area? I'm Molly Miller, one of the writers behind the Butler Eagles Weekend Entertainment section, and I'm here to banish the boredom from your cold and rainy days. Sign up and receive Miller Minutes, that's my column, and a list of Butler County-based events direct to your inbox every Thursday afternoon by visiting bit.ly/ButlerEagleWE newsletter. That's bit.ly/ButlerEagleWE newsletter. You can also find the latest events under the A&E tab at www.butlereagle.com. Click Weekend Entertainment, or pick up Thursday's print edition of the paper for the latest events. See, there's lots to do in Butler County when you read the Butler Eagles Weekend Entertainment section. Visit bit.ly/ButlerEagleWE newsletter to sign up for the weekly newsletter, so you won't be bored in Butler County again.
Hello, and welcome to this season of Alter Eagle. We are starting season 1 with the topic of addiction in Butler County. Conversations on the physical side of addiction, trauma, the neuroscience, mental health, and stigma surrounding addiction. Experts, resources, and stories from people who have fought addiction head on. I am your host, Laura Krigo. Let's keep the conversation going. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. For a long time, I suffered with depression and anxiety. I had tried therapy before, but struggled finding a therapist I connected with until I found BetterHelp. That's why I am so excited to share BetterHelp's mission to make therapy more affordable and more accessible, because finding a therapist can be hard, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online. Remote therapy sessions, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched with a therapist. Click the link in description and receive 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. And by clicking that link, you support this channel. Plus, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost without stressing about insurance, who's in your network, or anything like that. I was struggling for a long time, and BetterHelp was where I found my therapist, Whitney, who I still see weekly for almost 2 years now. So, if you're struggling, like I was, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in description or go to betterhelp.com/altereagle. That's betterhelp.com/altereagle. There's no better time than now to start your mental health journey. Thank you again, BetterHelp, for supporting this channel. Good morning. It's another beautiful Monday, and I don't know about you, but I think the weather is actually starting to turn around. Get out your sunscreen and get outside, get some vitamin D. Okay, part 2, Dr. Brophy and Joe Mahoney. This one we laugh a lot. There's a lot of joking around. You get to see, if you watch the video, you'll get to see Dr. Brophy do his "You Go Girl." And if you're just listening, you'll get to hear him say it. But such a fun episode with these gentlemen. Again, such an honor. And this is a big one. This episode is the original end of the first season of what we had planned for the first season for Alter Eagle. So I am just feeling all the feels. We were going to end with 17 episodes. It did bump up to 18. We added one in there. Feeling good about where I'm at. A lot of conversations will be coming up over the summer just to start sprinkling in other topics. So stay tuned for those. But I do want to hear from you. Reach out to me. Send me a message. If you follow us on Instagram, it's Alter Eagle Podcast. Find the Facebook page, send me a message, share your story. And if you have, there's a few of you that have reached out. I've written back to a couple people, and one person I actually met at the recovery center opening. So please just hang in there with me. I do want to get your stories out here, but we're shifting into some other things. So if you know someone who has an amazing story of resiliency, someone in education, healthcare, the restaurant industry, the arts, send them my way. Let's get into this episode. It's a good one. It's a fun one. And it was just such an honor. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, here we are with Joe Mahoney and Dr. Brophy from the Geyser Center.
So we need to start with, let's stabilize those things, and over time we'll make progress.
Yep.
We'll start to piece out what sort of set this off in motion in the first place. You know, why did even sometimes between two genetically identical twins, why did this one, to what he said, why did they develop the coping mechanisms to be able to navigate this without developing a substance use disorder versus the other genetically identical twin didn't develop those same coping mechanisms and ended up developing, you know, through self-medication, a substance use disorder. And so we're learning more and more about these things over time. And of course, like our technology getting better and being able to look at things like functional MRIs and, you know, where are these chemicals having their effect, understanding more about the neuroscience in general of addiction, like it all helps us do a better job. But how crazy is it that it was ever even separated in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
And like that just shows how far behind the times kind of we are, you know, even here in Pennsylvania. I mean, it was 5 years ago. I had a treatment facility and I could give them their medication assisted treatment. I could screen their body for the presence of drugs and put the structure and the accountability and all those things into place. But if I provided counseling, I wouldn't get reimbursed for that counseling, even though that's an integral part. We know that that's an integral part of their treatment. Oh, that's behavioral health. You're medical. You're a medical facility. And that, you know, that has to go away. It has to be. We know that comprehensive treatment approaches are the best way that gives us our best outcomes. And even from like a moral and ethical standpoint, like that's the right way to do it.
Yes.
You know? So, you know, why we're having to convince insurance companies to pay to do it the right way. I mean, that just shows how broken our healthcare system is.
And you know, as Dr. Brophy said, you know, addiction treatment in general has sort of changed and evolved to where 20 years ago, it was punishment based. It was punitive. You know, these clients would come into treatment seeking recovery, and they would kind of get punished and penalized while in treatment for that. And that was the model then. I mean, that was the accepted model. It kind of like that Scared Straight, you know, mentality.
Yes.
That show on MTV, I believe. From the mid 2000s, maybe.
Right? Hey, you're dating yourself now.
Yeah, but
we all are.
Yeah, but
we were there.
But it was that
we watched it.
It was that mentality, and that was accepted and normal, and that was evidence based good treatment.
Yeah.
To now where it has sort of evolved to it's comprehensive. We look at the whole person. It's holistic. We know we need to integrate the addiction treatment with the physical treatment, with the mental health, behavioral health treatment, with the family component. Because, you know, somebody in addiction, they're not in isolation. Nobody is in isolation. Even though they might say, like, I'm by myself, I don't have anybody, nobody cares about me. There is somebody connected somewhere along the pathway there that, you know, maybe for whatever reason, maybe they aren't involved at this point. Maybe it's self-salvation until that person gets well in recovery or whatever it is. But somewhere along the lines, there is a support system, a support person that we also have to provide care for to try to stabilize them. As well, because, you know, addiction kind of it takes a toll on the entire support, and you know, we a lot of times get family members of our clients asking, you know, I'm nervous for them to come back home. I'm nervous because I don't know what that's going to be like. So they need the tools and the support as well on how they can support that person in their recovery, what they might need to do or stop doing. You know, we talk a lot about enabling behaviors, and that a lot of times is somebody who is well-intentioned and thinks that they're helping their loved one, and then when they start peeling it back, it's like, no, you're sort of making it easier for them to kind of continue this behavior by your love, by these actions you're taking out of love. It's not harmful. It's not malintent behind it. They truly think that they're helping their loved one, and it takes a lot of work for somebody who's supporting a loved one in addiction to kind of realize where their enabling behavior is, and they need help in setting the boundaries. They need to know that it's okay to set those boundaries with their loved one. So all these systems are affected and impacted, and the treatment approaches need to kind of be that comprehensive look at it, where you're addressing all these different domains and components of that individual. Because I mean, how easy would it be, truthfully, if we could just say like, oh, you're just coming in with alcohol use disorder, and nothing else is going on. You're like, just that. We can deal with that in a heartbeat. Yeah.
You're like, here's a list of what to do. We're going to do this, and you're going to be fine. Right. Like, that's just not how it works.
It's person and context.
Yeah.
And everybody has their own experiences coming into it, and there's just a lot you have to unpack, with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And like that symposium earlier, you really saw with the panel discussion, right? Like where people are up there talking about like,
I was just going to say
their loved ones. And you really realize like how much of a significant impact, not only did that rabbit hole of addiction and the behaviors around it and all, but how it's still impacting them like to this day.
Yes,
like,
the emotions.
Exactly. Like parents just tearful stating that like, I ask myself every day if I did something wrong, if I did something to cause this, if I did something to push her down, that rabbit hole. And you can see like, that they're still devastated in that moment, even though their loved one has had a half a dozen years clean or, is doing significantly well. Like, and so like that they trauma, that impact, like it's a ripple effect. It impacts all the people around them. It impacts their children who are watching those behaviors happen at home. And that's why addiction, it is a community problem.
It is.
Yes.
It really is.
It truly is. And one of the first steps I think that as a community we can take to address it is to break down the stigma, to let people talk about it and share with one another about it. Whether you are somebody that's struggling with addiction yourself, or maybe you have a loved one that's struggling with addiction, talk about it. That's sort of the only way that change is going to happen. In overall in the community and the society.
Yes.
It shouldn't be the shameful thing that families are embarrassed to kind of open up about or talk about their loved one, going through that. Or the struggles that they had with it. We want and we encourage people to talk about that and share about it, because somebody in that audience today was probably thinking like, wow, it wasn't just me, or it wasn't just my family that went through that.
Absolutely.
And the more we can form those networks and that support, I think it's only going to be beneficial to reducing that stigma.
Yeah, it's the idea that no one's immune, right? That comes up all the time. Like if you think you're immune to this, you're not.
Right.
Like you said, I think you had said that too, that everyone in this room is somehow connected to some, and I literally was like, actually.
Right.
And you don't think about yourself as an individual. I mean, we're all one line away from we're all one step away from crossing that line where we could be into an addiction area or having a mental health kind of issue. We all walk that line every day. Unfortunately, some of us, for various reasons, cross over into that other realm of it that need help kind of coming back. But, on any given moment, any one of us could be one of those people.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really important to remember too. So for people that walk around and say like, oh, it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to my family. We did this and X, Y, and Z, and we have all these supports in place and all these opportunities. It can happen to anybody.
Absolutely.
It just is one choice, one choice that can send you over that line, and you're now, one of those stories.
Right. And some people feel like, that they were robbed of that choice even. I mean, I've taken care of a lot of people who it started with a doctor's prescription. Right, like they
legitimately,
Like they, and some of them will even say, like, I told my doctor I wasn't real comfortable, but they assured me like I was in pain, I needed this pain medication, and thankfully our understanding of the management of acute pain versus chronic pain has continued to evolve, because of this crisis that we ended up finding ourselves in.
Yes.
But a lot of people will come in and like they were just trusting that family member. I tell a devastating story about a patient that I used to have. She was a remarkable girl. As she told her story, any human just couldn't help but just feel like the sadness and devastation. She started being raped by her stepdad and her uncle when she was 8 years old. That continued until her 18th birthday. Her mother had her own mental health issues and was in the throes of substance abuse. And the only thing that she could think to kind of help her daughter was to give her a little bit of that powder, which would help soothe her physical genital pain, as well as her mental and emotional pain. So tell me how that girl made a choice, that led to her disease of addiction, and then, we're trying to manage this girl's addiction in her early 20s, and you're combating a decade of that all of those abnormal behaviors, from the self-medication to the brain changes that are happening as a result of that self-medication. And a lot of people are quick to, that mother should be shot.
Yep.
They want to go straight to that. Like, was it the mom that was causing the trauma? The mom was trying to alleviate pain, and the only way that she really understood to alleviate her own pain, and it's like you guys were saying, it's complex, and each individual situation has so many little factors, that need to be considered and looked at, that there is no easy way to treat addiction. There is no easy way to get people on that pathway of recovery. It's hard work, but it's work that is worth doing. And there is hope in recovery, because that's what, that's why I love working at the Geyser Center, is because we get to be a part of that journey and that hope, and this is a little off topic, but I'm board certified in emergency medicine and addiction medicine, right? And the reason why we get burnt out as ER doctors is because we're always a part of the bad. Nobody's coming to the ER on a good day, right? Everybody's there because they have a crisis on their hands.
Yeah.
And even if that crisis is minor in comparison, to the next person's, it's like, whatever, they couldn't get an appointment with their doctor or whatever, versus
bad lobster bisque,
right?
Yeah.
Obviously, like, that pendulum
true
swings
story.
wildly.
True story.
Right? Like, it could
stay on subject. Stay on topic. Another time when the mic's off. Sorry.
But the bottom line is, like, for that person, that is an emergency, even if other people don't recognize it as such. But we're not part of the healing. We're not part of the recovery. We're not part of the hugs and the thank yous and, you changed my life for the better. It's incredibly rare for people to come back to the ER because they were in such chaos and turmoil. They don't even remember the faces of who they interacted with that day, right?
Yes.
Very few times, and far between, they'll circle back around. We'll get a thank you card, or something along those lines. But for the most part, like, we are a part of this incredibly stressful, bad part, and that takes a toll. I have faces ingrained in my brain, children, that died under my care, catastrophic family situations. Everybody died of carbon monoxide poisoning, whatever it is. And as humans, we carry the toll of that. When I got into addiction medicine, I was doing it for multiple reasons. One is because my own family is riddled with addiction, and two, because, like, I recognized those dangerous habits in myself and thankfully was able to curtail them earlier than some of my family members, but ultimately, being in the world of addiction treatment, that actually allows me to be a part of the healing, to be a part of that journey where, their quality of life is improving over time, and their family members are coming in with those hugs and thank yous and appreciations. And that's where, the hope and recovery, it's there. And that's one thing I'm always careful of, is, like, to tell people about the neuroscience. Like, two things happen. One is it starts to reduce stigma because they realize the processes that are actually driving those behaviors, that it has nothing to do with that smart part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, where we make, all these complex decisions. It's being driven by a very old part of your brain that is mistakenly just chasing the dopamine, and that's all it's doing, is chasing that dopamine. So when we educate people on the neuroscience, it helps them understand those behaviors, which helps reduce stigma, but it also helps explain the mountain that we are up against, and getting that brain healed, back to a point where they are having healthy neural pathways and healthy, responses to the external stimuli that are being presented to their brain. And it's just fascinating and interesting, in itself.
It really is.
But when you look at that, when you look at, like, these different parts of the brain that are driving those behaviors, you realize, like, how complex this thing is, because it has everything to do with not just their genetics that they got from mom and dad, and not just their upbringing, not just their society and their culture and what's deemed acceptable versus what's not acceptable. It's all of those things plus their unique individual journey and substances that they abused and how often they abused them and the amount of them that they, you know, all those things need to be factored in. And I mean, it's a wonder that we can even gather all that information, you know, in a treatment facility, you know, but that in itself is a whole nother complex thing, because we're taking people, bringing them in and asking them, okay, you've gone down this rabbit hole where keeping secrets was incredibly important. Being deceitful was incredibly important for that person to accomplish what their goal was, which was to get that drug, right? Their brain has changed through neuroplasticity to align with that manipulation and using limited resources, you know, to get their goal substance and all that kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden we're bringing them into a facility where there's a bunch of strangers around, and we're like, oh, not only do you need to be honest about everything, but you need to be honest in front of everybody.
Yeah, you have to tell us everything.
Right. Everybody here is going to just stare at you.
Yeah.
Right. Like while you talk about some of the most sensitive vulnerabilities and things that you've gone through, you know, it's no wonder we barely get them to open up until they realize that they're safe and comfortable. Sometimes that can take a couple weeks. You know?
Of course.
They have to see it from other people. They have to truly build that trust, you know, with the people around them. And so, you know, paying for somebody to go to 30 days where you think you're going to reverse 10 years
in 30 days
of brain changes, like of course it doesn't work. You know,
you can't even form a habit like getting up every morning to go to the gym unless you consistently do it. What is it, every day for like 6 weeks? And that's right. Just like, I'm going to get up 3 days a week and go to the gym.
Yeah, that's a positive habit.
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
So
it's atomic habits, right? Like it's
if I put my sneakers right next to the bed, as soon as I step out, I'm like, some days you're gonna kick them out of the way and be like, that's right. Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Change takes time.
Yeah, it takes time. Yeah. And there's also that in a sense of, you know, when we're talking about stigmas, there are certain people that it's like an out of sight, out of mind. They don't want to be bothered with it. They're like, we don't want those people around. We don't want, and it's like, but again, you're not immune to this, and someday this could be something that could affect you and your family. So maybe if we just try to
and you know, that's why we sort of encourage as well, like families to sort of talk about what they know about their family history, because you know, kind of going with that stigma, too often, you know, we hear from maybe a younger client coming into somebody in their 20s that's maybe in their first round of addiction treatment, and is sort of saying like, you know, I thought that I was the only one in my family that had struggled with this, but then I found out that, you know, Grandpa Tom had issues, and I saying similar struggles as I've had, or you know, my aunt or whomever it may be. And really what we encourage parents or just family members in general to do is to share that history with your kids or your nieces and nephews, your grandchildren, whatever. So that way they kind of know when if they're going in to pick up a drink, you know, they kind of already have at least the knowledge that I need to proceed very carefully with this because I have a genetic predisposition because my grandpa had struggled with this. Right. And too often we hear like, we never talked about it. We never shared that. We didn't know it was in our history. We didn't know it was in our family history. And then, you know, you peel back to the parent layer and they're saying, we just found out it was in our family history. We knew Dad drank a lot, but we just never talked. It was just something that you just kind of dealt with and never talked about. Because maybe he wasn't violent or anything, but maybe he was just a drinker, a functioning drinker. You know, and you know, it's that kind of stuff that I think generationally does start to shift and change, and your understanding of it and your comfort level with it does shift by generation. But you know, for those family members that do sort of know what's in your family and sort of, you know, have that knowledge, you know, share that with your loved ones, just so they know and they can at least have that in the back of their minds when they're making some decisions. Yeah.
There's so many reasons behind it when I ask about those kind of things, because, you know, there's an element of shame with substance use, right? And unfortunately, because of stigma and shame, it's a lot of families are quick to conceal and deny, and, you know, oh, look, we're not talking about that right now. We're not talking about that, you know, and that is, you know, obviously that's setting people up for failure that are coming in those later generations that then don't have that knowledge of, well, I may be genetically predisposed, to go down that rabbit hole a lot faster than other people. And I mean, that's a real thing. Like we look at, nature versus nurture. We look at, were they born destined to be an addict, or, was it the sequence of events that, they went through in childhood, that did this. And the truth is it's very clear that it's a combination of both things. Your genetics make up about 50% of your risk. And then the other risk factors come from, your society, your community, the individual themselves, but that makes up about the other 50%, and there's risk factors, but there's also protective factors on both sides, not just like activities that they're enrolled in and that sort of stuff, but the genetics too. We're seeing that certain genetics are, if that allele is present, it's protective. We find other ones that, well, if that allele is present, it's more of a destructive element. It's more problematic. And we're just starting to scratch the surface on that stuff. Calculating what's called a genetic addiction risk score, or GARS. And it's very superficial right now because we're just sort of scratching the surface on the technology. Being able to decode the human genome and figure out like, well, which genes are present in these individuals, but then you also talk about activation of those genes. Just having a gene present isn't enough. Certain experiences, certain external stimuli that brain is exposed to will cause the DNA to become methylated, which is basically like activation, of that gene. And the more we learn about that stuff, the more each one of those tools, from MAT to the type of, behavioral health and counseling to, how we structure their treatment, their support, like all of those things, I hope and I believe that in time, as we get better and better at understanding, the parts of the brain that are driving these processes and what sort of, traumatic events are more likely to, push somebody down that road of addiction. Like as we understand more and more of that, hopefully we can, make better and better, more informed decisions about how are we going to manage it moving forward.
So, and you talked a lot today about co-occurring. Do you want to get into that?
Yeah. So, a co-occurring disorder is essentially it's two things happening at once. And there's a variety of ways to look at co-occurring. So, we have co-occurring, physical health issues that co-occur with addiction issues. We have co-occurring mental health issues that occur with physical health. But, it's very, very, very high probability that addiction and mental health are going to co-occur together. To kind of go back to an earlier topic of which is first, which causes the other, doesn't matter. All that matters is that they're there, and they're sort of, the other thing with co-occurring is they speak to each other. So they kind of feed each other a little bit.
Okay.
So it's not necessarily two things that are happening at the same time in isolation of each other. It's sort of two things that are happening at the same time that are like feeding each other.
Okay.
So, mental health and addiction are two very, very common, unfortunately, kind of co-occurring comorbidities that we sort of look at and try to screen for. Commonly, as we've said, generally speaking, it was occasionally you'd get a depression or an anxiety diagnosis with a substance use disorder. But recently, probably within the past 10 to 5 years, and it just is getting more and more kind of severe. It's coming in now with bipolar, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, with addiction, schizophrenia and addiction, schizoaffective disorder and addiction, which was...
What is schizoaffective disorder?
Schizoaffective disorder was always sort of like this disorder that you would hear about in classes that was like, you're never going to see this in practice because it's so rare. And really what it is, it's sort of like this little blend of some psychosis type of symptomatology with some kind of mood symptomatology, like a mood disorder symptomatology, sort of kind of marrying each other. in a very non-productive marriage, and you start to get some very kind of like eccentric behaviors and kind of like odd behaviors, repetitive behaviors out of it. But it was kind of always like, oh, you're never going to see this. It's kind of like such a rare thing. Generally speaking, if you see somebody presenting like this, they're going to be maybe, have depression with psychotic features, or, maybe just schizophrenic with some mood features. But now we're seeing a lot of schizoaffective, which is really interesting. And, and as we kind of peel that back as well, we kind of wonder, is it truly schizoaffective? Or is it a kind of a symptomatology of maybe the post-acute withdrawal that they're going through from their substance, or maybe it's just years and years of use of a substance that is sort of kind of rewiring everything to kind of present this way. So, we don't know truly if schizoaffective is on the rise, or if it's just the presentation of it, is sort of leading that diagnosis more so than it truly being there. We see a lot as well of borderline personality disorder.
Yes, I've heard that.
Yeah.
Okay.
You want to talk about
I'm
that?
like, let's do it.
So borderline personality disorder was, personality disorders in general are, again, very rare to find, but borderline is the most common of them to find.
Okay.
And truly what a borderline, historically, traditionally, what that diagnosis was somebody was walking, quote unquote, walking the border of psychosis, which was schizophrenia or whatever it may be along the psychosis realm, and the mood disorder.
Okay.
And again, this was another kind of really, really bad chemistry kind of reacting, and you're getting, not that either diagnosis is great where they have like good symptoms, but you're getting like the worst of both of those when you have somebody with a borderline personality disorder.
Okay.
And a personality disorder is historically very difficult to treat, because it is so ingrained just in personality. It's so ingrained into who that person is, and how they relate to others in the world, that a lot of times, they don't think there's an issue with themselves. It's everybody else around them. So, if you're a clinician or a loved one pointing out to them a behavior, it's not them, it's you. You're the one that has the problem with it, not them. So borderlines are historically, they have very kind of...
Is it okay? I think I've dated some of them.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, absolutely. They have very fluid emotions, so they can kind of very rapidly cycle between an emotion. They have a very, when you boil it down, somebody with borderline has a very intense fear of abandonment. So what they're trying to do is reject you before you reject them. So they're going to do everything they can to sort of push you away and see how much you'll tolerate before you snap. And leave them because that's their core fear, is that they're going to be left. They're unlovable. They're going to be left. So guess what? I'm gonna want to leave you if you leave me, it's going to be because of me. It's not going to be because
something they didn't have control
yes,
over. Yeah.
They want control over the abandonment.
Yeah.
Okay.
So really, we see this a lot, and very frequently, just statistically speaking, it is diagnosed more in females than males, and there's a whole other discourse on that. Is that just kind of like because the DSM was written by males, and these are... Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole other podcast around that we can talk about.
Wow, yeah.
Maybe like gender bias and diagnoses or something. There you go, Laura.
Let's slide it into like a dating season.
Yeah. Hey.
I mean, you're both married, so you give pointers,
And here's the thing with borderlines.
hey,
borderlines.
Single ladies, listen up. No, I'm sorry.
Borderlines are a nightmare for people that are dating. Okay, so
I'm already like things to talk about with my therapist on Wednesday.
Are those the notes you were taking?
No, I'm reading notes from earlier.
Borderline
yes.
question mark.
A classic borderline will either think that you are the greatest person in the world, you're the angel that saved their life, you are like, you're the coming of Jesus.
They exalt you.
Or you are such a low POS, you're garbage, you're nothing. And like, there's no middle ground. You're either one extreme or another.
Got it.
And if you think about that, like we're seeing more diagnoses of that. And we're also like, think about the person who's abusing substances, right? Like they get into such a level of desperation that it may start off with, you're the only person I can count on. Please, I need this money. Please, I'm in this situation. And then as soon as they're denied that, it's, you don't love me. I hate you, and so you see the swinging of these moods. Okay. So you start to see how, not just borderline, but so many of the mental health diagnoses, I mean, even schizoaffective. Like I've heard some psychiatrists describe that as like bipolar light, where the there's
I've heard that. Okay,
the cycles,
right, and ultimately though, like with substances, like putting a substance in your body and then withdrawing from that substance, like you're seeing the neurotransmitters, peak and trough and peak and trough in a similar way. So it does make sense that it's so hard to piece those things out early on, especially when somebody is like first entering treatment and they're freshly off of using substances. That neurochemistry has not equilibrated and stabilized yet. But as time goes on and you have less and less of that impact from outside external stimuli, then you start to see kind of where is their baseline? Like where are they, without any of those substances? And that's our best opportunity to try and figure out what co-occurring conditions, are present.
Yeah. And we did talk about like changes in treatment methods, in addiction. So we did talk about that and how it used to be this like, I guess, really aggressive, tough love, right? And it was like, you need to take responsibility for this and you need to get sober and that's it. It was like just drawing a line. And that's obviously, that can be very trauma inducing, right? For somebody if they don't realize that that's what it's coming from.
Yeah. And they would even take it a step further sometimes to where they would, if you were a client in addiction treatment, they would actually, I can't even believe I'm saying this, they would force you to make tombstones, headstones with your name and date of death on it.
I've heard that.
And they would make you walk around the facility like carrying those around your neck. Right. To kind of say like, hey, if you don't get your life on track here, like this is what's going to happen to you, which there's other ways of doing that and sort of presenting that information. But that's sort of how far we have come and we have evolved. And that wasn't all that long ago in addiction treatment, really, when you boil it down, and it's, there's just been so many changes in the field, and a lot of it for the positive. Your greater understanding of addiction overall, kind of a greater understanding of the holistic nature of addiction, and that we need to treat it from this holistic, comprehensive perspective. And there does seem to be, at least in the field, more empathy, a push toward more empathy and understanding, and knowing that like this tough love may be what those in your life, like your loved ones, need to do for you. But when you're in a treatment space, that's not what you should be doing. Correct. You need to be setting boundaries and modeling boundaries, healthy boundaries, clear boundaries, and modeling how to set healthy boundaries for them for sure. But this kind of tough love approach is not what you should be doing in the treatment space. Correct.
So like I know Alyssa briefly talked about an experience she had with someone where, this girl stormed out. And she had to let her go, right? She had to let her and hope that she would really know like that she's doing this because she cares. She's like, but it came to a point where like I had set a boundary and she crossed it. And she had to, so it's like, and I'm throwing something out there at you, so please feel free to be like, I don't know if I want to share that. But have there been, I'm sure there have, right? You said 16 years, and how long have you been?
I've been doing
fresh out of med school.
Last week, I just graduated.
Congratulations. I wish I had the pomp and circumstance, like, on my things. I do have. This episode is brought to you by Butler County District Attorney Richard A. Goldinger, R.W. McDonald & Sons Incorporated, Robert Stevens Jewelers. Thank you to our sponsors for your support on our first season of the Alter Ego podcast. Be sure to click the link in bio for your discount for BetterHelp Therapy online. 10% off your first month. There we go. That's
I like that.
Little congratulations. Okay.
It's been 19 years. I'm dating myself a bit, but I graduated medical school 19 years ago. But I've only been fully immersed in the world of addiction medicine for about 10 years now. You know? But that's what I started getting into treatment around 2014, and then 2016 is when I opened my first treatment facility. And so, you know, that being said, the addiction story has been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. I mean, one of my earliest memories, I was 5 or 6 years old, and we had taken my brother to St. Francis, that hospital that used to exist in, you know, East Liberty. And I remember, like, I still can see the green tile and the wood carved paneling on the walls, and asking, you know, my brother's 10 years older than me, and I remember asking my mom and dad, like, why isn't he coming home? What do you mean? What do you mean we're leaving him here? You know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I was 5 or 6, he was 15 or 16, you know, and that was the beginning of his kind of substance use journey. And you know, so I've always had that interest and perspective. And when I was studying neuroscience at Pitt, that was one of my big things. Like, what makes us different, but what makes us the same, you know? And really, you know, just seeing the whole understanding of addiction and everything evolve just over the past 10 years, you know, has been incredible. I mean, like, you know, as humans, we like to think that, you know, we know everything. We like to think like we're at the pinnacle of, you know, our understanding of this thing. Like, it was only 100 years ago we were shoving ice picks up people's noses, you know, to literally scramble their prefrontal cortex,
lobotomies, like,
it was like, well,
shock.
Give them that medicine. Well, that didn't work. Okay, well, let's jam an ice pick up there. Like,
oh my gosh.
You know? And
American Horror Story, literally. Now they make a show out of it. And I'm like, that's messed up.
Entertaining show. I like
and
it.
it was true though. It was based on true
events.
events.
It was true. So it's
And you know, we always do that where, like, we look at the past through the lens of today, you know, with a certain level of judgment. But I always remind people also that they're going to look at us with that same level of judgment through their lens, you know, 100 years from now. And just how we look at things like lobotomies or bringing a priest in to do an exorcism for a kid who has a seizure disorder. Like, we look at that like, what? No way.
Yeah.
They're going to look at us the same way. They're going to say, like, even from, you know, a decade ago, like, wait, they treated medical and psychiatric and two, like, completely different arenas. You know, they're going to look and say, they gave everybody the same medicine.
And that's the hope, though, is that in 100 years from now, we hope that it's evolved to the point where they're like, can you believe what these people used to do? Like, you know,
we've got it figured out.
Yeah, and that's the hope.
Because
because as humans, we are supposed to evolve, and our understanding and our learning and our capacity for things is supposed to grow and evolve. So I do hope that in 100 years,
me too. I hope they're looking at us through a lens like that.
Who's ever doing this podcast in 100 years is like.
It won't be me.
Doing a historical deep dive.
In my next life. No, I'm just kidding. We're not going to get into that weird. Yeah, we could. I mean, you know.
That's a good one for Alyssa and you to get into.
Oh, I bet. Because we talked about crystals. And I was like, I have crystals. We'll sit a crystal on the table during class. Selenite wand, you know.
Yeah,
like,
I think you should.
Don't fire me, you know. It's like, they're going to be like, so we want to go in a different direction. Yeah. You can't have crystals on the table. I'm like, well, they're on my desk, so you know. No, it's just, and one of the things, and we did talk about this too, is like when I met with her, we were laughing a lot, and I don't know if that's because we've known each other. You know, when I say known each other, we knew who we were in high school. Yeah. We didn't hang out in high school, but you know. Even just calling her and having her immediately be like, oh my gosh, how are you? And I'm like, I want to know what you're doing, because I think the fact that you work in this field, first of all, I have to commend to both of you too. Like, it can't, like you said, it's not an easy thing to, you know, have these situations where someone is coming to you and you think, okay, like these parents, these stories that we heard today from the sister and the mothers, where it's like, is this going to be the last time? Like when they don't, they text them and they don't hear from them, and all this fear, you know. So I can only imagine what that feels like when you're dealing with a lot of people, and you're the one who is like, okay, like I can help you. I know, like, we are going to figure this out. You're not alone. But how has there been an experience? Maybe that just really, like you mentioned, you know, your brother and you being 5 and like remembering things like the color of the tiles and the walls, and my brain works that way too. But has there been an experience like with a patient where you really thought like, oh, like, can I do this? Like, how am I going to continue to forge on in this? This is a hard one. Do you know, has there ever, without giving details, but perhaps something that really challenged you when it came to all of this?
Well, I think that if you're in this field long enough, and if you're doing it right, I think you're gonna have those moments. Yeah. And I think you should. And I think you should. Yeah. Because I think that shows still the passion that as a professional you still have for that job, and for the field, and for the human in front of you. I think it does show that there's a level of empathy still for that person, that, as a professional, I know that you can do better, or that we can do better together as a team, or whatever it is, but you have to meet me halfway, and you have to work with me halfway.
Yes.
And we always tell our clients there, just overall, when we see them start to kind of slack off, like, we can't be doing more work than you, for you. We'll do 50-50 with you, but we can't be doing 60-40 for you. So, there are definitely, I think any professional that you talk to is going to have that sort of, at least one of those moments. Yeah. Where you think, I don't know, I'm so frustrated with this one. And then you kind of have to look at, like, why am I so frustrated with this one? What is it about this one in particular? When I may have had 20 other people that day in front of me that did not have this react, like I didn't get this reaction.
Yeah.
No, that's a great response, and I agree, and I certainly have, like, situations that I've come across over time, like the one girl that I mentioned, that horrible childhood, like, you start to realize, like, what you're up against, and you start to think, like, oh my goodness, how am I going to help this person get better? And I've been involved in all sorts of situations. I mean, even situations where, like, a person's on hospice, like, is it even worth, trying to attempt the crossing that mountain, whenever there's other, there's a bigger elephant in the room, or, there's addressing that is going to allow their pain, to kind of rise to the surface. And it can be very complex. I mean, the one thing I'll say is, like, I am a student of human nature. I love the stories. I love the individual things that make that person's story unique. I'm also endlessly curious. So I'm always going down some rabbit hole, where I'm learning about new things, as Joe will tell you. Sometimes those things are a bit off the wall, whether it be like,
like, hey, did I tell you about this book I was reading about the World War I submarines? And
you're like, no, but tell me.
I do. I go down.
That's amazing.
I go down these rabbit holes, but I also love.
And you just come across things, and, like,
something will pique my interest. Something I see will pique my interest, and oftentimes at first I'll just be, like, kind of remotely curious, and then I know, and my wife knows too. She's like, "Oh boy, here we go." And I go all down that rabbit hole.
That's great.
Podcasts, audiobooks, whatever I can absorb to learn more about that topic.
Brittany will be like, "Of course you are reading that. Why wouldn't you be reading something like that?"
Typically says, "Of course you are. Of course you are."
Was it World War I? You said? What was it?
Actually, I'm on a World War II kick right now.
It was about a year ago. He was very into World War I.
Okay. Well, at least you're going in chronological order, right?
Okay. I always move on to the next interesting thing. But even with the neuroscience and the neurophysiology, and, like, what do we really understand about the brain? And I mean, we're just scratching the surface on that stuff. And I love it. And right now, I'm following a neurosurgeon out of Stanford, Dr. James Doty, and he's actually studying, like, all these things that we thought were sort of like hokey or hippie-ish things, like, mindfulness and yoga and meditation. And, like, he attributes all of his success to learning meditation at a young age when he was going through all this trauma. His dad was an alcoholic. His mom was overdosing on pills all the time. His brother was being bullied. They grew up in a trailer park. And he recognizes that because someone taught him to meditate at a very young age, that he was able to regulate those emotions and not let those emotions take over, his day-to-day behavior and life.
Yes.
What's even more fascinating is, like, he's now written a book called Into the Magic Shop, where he tells that story. But now, as one of the top neurosurgeons at one of the top universities in the country, he is studying why. why does meditation and mindfulness and yoga and these things, like, what is that doing to your brain on a cellular level? And it's fascinating. I mean, what it looks like, and I'll explain this as quickly as I can. You know, our brains, as you heard a little bit about the symposium, you know, like our brains are like those Russian nesting dolls, right? Where every time you open it up, you're at a deeper level. And as you get into those deeper and deeper levels, those are older parts of the brain from an evolutionary standpoint, right? The older parts of the brain can always overpower and bypass the newer parts of your brain, which makes sense, right? Because they kept your species alive even up to that point. And even though evolution may have diverged, you know, and we're no longer the same mammal as, you know, other mammals in the animal kingdom, all mammals have that limbic system, you know, that midbrain, which is why it's called the paleomammalic aspect of your brain. If you go further back into the brainstem, you get into the reptilian part of your brain. You know, but it's important for people to understand.
I love that. I'm sorry. I think that's so cool.
It is very cool, right? Like, I mean, that's like science that we can see and we can follow over time, you know, and it's important to understand that the old parts of the brain can always overpower those new parts of the brain. So we think we're always in the driver's seat because we're using that newest part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, you know, and we're making all of our rational decisions and we're weighing short-term consequences versus long-term gains. And we're actually the only animal species that can actually step outside of ourselves and look at our behaviors and think about how that's going to impact our future and the people around us. Like, you know, chimpanzees can't do that. They might share 99% of our DNA, but they can't plan ahead long term like that. They can't rationally think their way through a complex problem. Only we can do that. And even though we think we're always in the driver's seat, those old parts of the brain and the chemistry associated with those old parts of the brain is driving our behavior in ways that we don't even really understand. And so, you know, I often explain to people, like, I may have a cup of water in front of me, and water is so important to our survival that we couldn't go 3 days without it or we would die. Right? So why is nobody fixating and focusing on my water? Because your limbic system needs are met, right? Like, you are hydrated. So your limbic system, this older part of your brain that's located in the middle of your brain, drives you towards food, water, sex, shelter, and safety. Well, as long as those needs are met, you are now free to use that prefrontal cortex. But if I take away any of those needs, you're not using that prefrontal cortex anymore. You know, if you sit in this room with no food or water for 3 days, you're not thinking about the content of our podcast, right? Like, you're thinking of how can you get the water away from everybody else so that you survive. You know, and although that can be hard for some people to understand, like, I encourage people to think about even just the different decisions that you make going to the grocery store on an empty stomach versus a full stomach, right? Like, you make different decisions. They've studied this, that you know, it can even impact the decision and the sentence that a judge hands out. You know, our brain chemistry is always in control. And even if we had that terrible scenario where we're locked in this room and we're all fighting over water, how do you get somebody to stop worrying about your water? You put a plastic bag over their head and take away their oxygen. That sounds barbaric, I get it, but the point is that we're now stimulating that reptilian brain, the part of your brain that regulates and monitors your oxygen consumption and your CO2 levels and all, you know, the thing that's literally keeping you alive on a minute-to-minute basis. So you put a plastic bag over that person's head, and their brain knows that if they don't solve that problem in the next 2 minutes, they're not going to be alive long enough to worry about your water, right? So this is the big thing about neuronal hierarchy and how addiction is bypassing that front part of the brain. Because when you sit down and you have that coming to Jesus talk with that person, you say, look at all the destruction that you've caused. Look at how you've wrecked your life, your finances, your career, your family, your health, you know, all these things. In that moment, that person can register that thought. They can use that prefrontal cortex and think, like, you're right. Like, I hate everything about what's gone on to this point. And I've had that conversation hundreds of times. Joe's had that conversation hundreds of times, because we work in the world of addiction, you know, where we are talking about those things. The problem is when that person goes out into the community, and particularly if they're triggered a certain way, if those limbic system needs are not met, that prefrontal cortex is going offline until that need gets met. And think about the world's dictators. What do they take away? Your access to food, water, sex, safety, shelter. Your entire being of how safe you are on an hour-to-hour basis is now no longer stable. You're going to do whatever they tell you to do to stabilize your life in that way and make sure that you and your family have stable access to food and water and a safe environment. And what they're doing is they're engaging that limbic system. The other way that a person's limbic system can be engaged is if they're in a period of emotional instability. Okay, your amygdala, it's a little part of your brain that's about the size of a walnut, and that's located in your temporal lobe of your midbrain. Okay, and that's where all of our emotions come from. Well, similarly, like when that limbic system gets overactivated, it's going to bypass that smart part of our brain, that prefrontal cortex, and this what was traditionally a part of ancient human wisdom. Don't make a decision when you're emotionally worked up. You're going to make a bad decision, right?
Yes.
Walk away from it, come back with a cool head. You'll be able to make smarter, more rational decisions. Unfortunately, we've kind of got away from that. Like we encourage people like, oh, you go, girl. You show your passion. You show your emotion. Meanwhile,
you send that text.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, don't send it.
Don't send that text. Right. Just cool down.
Write it down on a piece of paper and rip it up.
Come back at it later.
Can we go back to that?
I thought Brophy had a good you go girl though. Like that.
Oh, he did. It was good.
Yeah, you've been encouraging people to send that. You've been encouraging people to send those texts.
Yeah, no.
He's like, do it, yeah, girl.
And if you think about it, like that's reality TV, right? Like we want to see that. We want to see
everybody's watching it.
Yep, and it's entertaining, right?
Yeah.
And we know that they're making bad decisions, and we know, but honestly, like it all comes down to the neurophysiology, right?
Yeah.
Like and that's why we have to pay attention to some of those ancient wisdoms. Show me your 5 best friends, I'll tell you your future. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. All these things. Don't come at it with in the moment of heated emotions. Write down your plan, come back to it later, see if it still makes sense. Those things exist because for millennia that has been the human experience, and we need to, pay attention to those things and understand that neurophysiology, even though we may feel like we're constantly in control, it's our brain chemistry and our physiology, that is behind that. Yes, there are other times where we are more in control than others, and I understand that for a lot of people there's religion and there's God's plan and there's those elements to factor in as well. But I mean, ultimately, no matter which way you look at it, it's the physiology and the chemistry that in that moment-to-moment basis, is driving those behaviors, those decisions. And so, until we understand that, we're not going to make progress.
Yes, I agree. I agree with the meditation and yoga and all of that as well, because that's something that's been a lot of my adult life. And I feel like when I first moved back to Butler, just interacting with my family in situations and noticing there's like immediate reactions to things. And I'm like, let's just take a beat and just, everybody's kind of mad and they're all like, what's wrong with you? How are you so calm? And I'm like, because freaking out doesn't do anything. And most of the time we're going to say something that in 15, 30 minutes, we're going to be like, I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to say that. It's like, you're not going to forget. You might forget what someone said to you, but you're not going to forget how it made you feel.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I'm very much a huge, advocate of that. And also how you say something, right? It's like you could say something 2 totally different ways. Not what you say, how you say. Those 2 things I just try to live by those and be mindful of that. And sometimes I'll say something and be like, I'm sorry, that came out wrong. That's not how I meant that. But that's because I've had to recognize that in myself. So when we're talking about addiction and we're talking about mental health, and I had, also had this conversation with Alyssa. She keeps coming up, topic of conversation. Alyssa. Hey, shout out.
Hey, Alyssa.
Hey, girl. Go, girl. Wait, give her another. You go, girl.
You go, girl. Yeah.
That's going to be a meme. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's going to be a GIF.
Going viral for the wrong stuff.
Yeah. Dr. Brophy.
But to take that to sort of the next level too is, we have this newer outer cortex, the neocortex, which is what involves the prefrontal cortex. And we have this older part of the brain that's kind of in the middle of the midbrain, and that's where our emotions arise from too. And that's capable of bypassing, our prefrontal cortex and going right around it. What's also important to understand is that, that Also, part of the limbic system is what's called our autonomic nervous system. Okay, so our autonomic nervous system is things that some people have heard a little bit about it. They've heard about like the sympathetic response, fight, flight, or freeze.
Yep.
But a lot of people don't really understand like the whole picture with that. Okay, so every human brain at any given time, all three of us in this room, everybody in this building, we are always somewhere on the pendulum between sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay, we're always somewhere in there. These are old aspects of our physiology that kept us alive, through millions of years. Mm-hmm. The best definition that I can give of somebody that is at their ultimate sympathetic response is if a grizzly bear jumps out in front of you, right? Your brain does not need to analyze that grizzly bear. And is it tall? Are those claws sharp? It needs to shut that part of your brain, and that's exactly what it does, right? It dilates your pupils, it increases your heart rate, it sends the blood to your extremities, your arms and legs, the muscles there, so that you can get the heck out of there and away from that bear, right? You also don't need to be learning things in that moment. You can learn about it later, So your brain shuts all that off. It shuts down neuroplasticity, it shuts off your prefrontal cortex, and it gets your butt out of there, okay? That's the ultimate extreme of the sympathetic response. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic response, okay? So if sympathetic stimulation results in fight, flight, or freeze, which is what we hear all the time, right? Like, my sympathetic nervous system was stimulated, and whether I had fight, flight, or freeze, it felt out of my control, right? Well, the opposite of that, the parasympathetic, and instead of being when the grizzly bear jumps out, the epitome and most extreme example of you at your most parasympathetic is when you're asleep, okay? And instead of sympathetic, fight, flight, freeze, the parasympathetic is rest, digest, and repair. Okay, so when we're asleep, that's when all those things are happening to the maximum capacity. We are resting. All of the blood is being diverted away from our extremities and to our gut, so we are digesting, and our immune system is recharging and kind of at its maximum. If you take a mammal and hit them with a cattle prod every time they're kind of dozing off to sleep, in about a week they'll die of infection because their immune system breaks down, and they'll die of very basic things like fungal pneumonias and stuff like that. So,
wow.
The fact that we are always somewhere on that pendulum, we may be sympathetic in the extreme, we may be parasympathetic in the extreme, but for the most part throughout our day, we're somewhere in between there.
Okay.
That can actually help people mitigate mental health issues and things like that. And oftentimes, what do we tell people? Like, slow down, take a deep breath, relax. And it's like, why does that work? And I used to get mad, like, that's not going to work. There's a problem here,
Yeah.
The reason why it works is because just the simple fact of taking a slow, deep breath in and out, that will stimulate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the parasympathetic nerve. It's the one that's responsible for all the rest, digest, and repair, and slowing your heart rate down and bringing your blood pressure down and focusing more on digestion and repair, and all that sort of stuff. So that's why oftentimes in that moment when somebody is sympathetically overstimulated and they're all fight, flight, freeze all the time, moving them into the parasympathetic is the way to help them out of that. In the moment, they can do that through breathing exercises and things like that. But over time, what works is things like meditation and mindfulness and yoga. And to bring it full circle to what we had talked about earlier, that's the beauty of James Doty, Dr. Doty, and his story. Is not only does he attribute all of his success to learning how to meditate and being able to regulate those emotions, now at Stanford, he's doing the studies that show why those things help. And what it turns out is that during meditation and mindfulness and yoga and all these like healthy practices, you are unlocking neuroplasticity. The sympathetic where you're not supposed to learn, you're supposed to get the hell out of there. Well, the parasympathetic is the opposite of that.
Yeah.
You're asleep. The reason why you're dreaming is because your neurons are laying down new memories and solidifying all the things you learned that day and putting things from short-term memory into long-term memory. So neuroplasticity is incredibly important for that parasympathetic side. Well, when you are able to actively awaken the parasympathetic side and actively move that needle and that pendulum over to the parasympathetic side, you are opening up neuroplasticity, which allows you to better learn and adapt and change because your neurons can change in that moment. And so, that it's just fascinating to me. It's fascinating to see all of the behavioral things that we've known over time, now seeing the scientific evidence behind it.
Yes.
And I just can't get enough of that stuff. And I love, guys that are doing that kind of research, like Dr. Doty. It's great stuff.
Mm-hmm. Were you always like this as a kid? Were you always like really into like learning or do you feel like because I feel like as I've become an adult, I've been like, ooh, I want to know about that. And why didn't I pay attention to that in school? And I wish I had. Like, I'm proud to be a nerd,
Yeah,
like,
right. I am too. Right? I tell people all the time, I'm a self-proclaimed nerd. Yeah, big time. And
where my nerds at?
Right.
But seriously, I don't know. It's fascinating to me.
And I've always been a very curious individual, certainly now that I'm in my mid 40s and, beautiful family at home, those things have changed a little bit. And I'm more interested in like history, the history of the world and the history of the decisions that we've made over the past. So like we said earlier, I'm real big on like World War II history and stuff like that. When I was a kid, I wasn't interested in history. I didn't realize the value there, but I would still do things like take my dad's, watches apart and try and figure out like, what was making them move that way and how could they be so accurate. And, so curiosity has been a lifelong, thing, for me.
Yes.
But it's, what I've been curious in has, sort of changed and evolved over time.
If you are somebody who's struggling, with addiction or you feel like you're struggling with addiction or you have a loved one that might be struggling with addiction, the best thing you can do is reach out. Even if it comes that it's really, not an issue and maybe you're just, hearing this and are like, oh, maybe something's going on here. It never hurts to reach out. You can always give us a call at the Ellen O'Brien Geyser Center. Or check us out on our website, geysercenter.com, for more information. But, we'd be happy to talk with you and help you, sort through whatever you need to sort through. So that number is 724-287-8205, and the extension is 101.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
The only other thing, and I don't mean to like jump back into the whole conversation here, but, we talked a lot about neuronal hierarchy and how these old parts of the brain can overpower the new parts of the brain. The other really important thing for people to understand is the neuroplasticity element, is to understand that the brain is constantly changing and it's changing in response to the external stimuli that we feed it, and in a very dysfunctional way. When someone's going down that rabbit hole of addiction, their brain is changing to make them better at addiction. More skilled at taking a small number of resources, but still being able to accomplish your goal. More skilled at manipulating the people around you and telling, what they want to hear and those kind of things. Well, neuroplasticity is always happening. And the beauty of it is once we stabilize that substance use disorder and we start guiding that neuroplasticity in a healthy direction, that's where we truly see that progress and that healing of the brain. But it takes time. And so all these different things that we talked about from, different types of tools like medications and MAT, different types of interventions like counseling and cognitive behavioral therapy and all that kind of stuff. And all of it are tools that we need to pull in to improve that person's chance in succeeding, in their recovery. But because of neuroplasticity, there will always be hope. There will always be that ability for our brain to continue to change. We always thought that your brain developed till you were 25, and
25.
And then it was fixed. However you're wired at 25, that's how you'll be at 35, 45, 55. We now know that your brain, those little connections from those dendrites to the neighboring neurons, those are constantly changing based on your external stimuli, and those changes continue until you're in your 70s. That's why it gets so much harder for people in their 70s to learn new things, right? Because they don't have the benefit of that neuroplasticity anymore. But for the rest of us, like, the neuroscience of addiction is incredibly powerful, right? Like it makes people abandon everything they love in the world.
Yeah.
Everything that matters, like their family, their spouse, their finances, their careers. Like, you pick it, addiction will take it away from you.
Yes.
But the other flip side of that argument is like understanding neuroplasticity and understanding that our brain changes based on the external stimuli. Like that's empowering. You know, that the power of the neuroscience of addiction can be harnessed to accomplish whatever goals that person has in life, as long as they are choosing those external stimuli wisely. And everyone knows you won't be able to control all of them. Family members are going to get sick. Dogs are going to get hit by cars. Bad, sad, tragic things are going to happen. But that doesn't mean you can't control the other 80%, right? Like, and so that's my message often to young folks is choose wisely. You know, learn about, you know, your genetic risks and predisposition. Learn about, you know, what sort of resources you have in place to help you mitigate that stuff, but also learn that your brain is constantly changing. And so any area that you can choose a better external stimuli, you know, to move your brain and your thought processes, your personality, all those things move you towards where you want to be 5 years from now, embrace it, you know, and I believe that neuroplasticity is the scientific answer behind most of the self-help books. You know, everything from Talk to Yourself More Positively, the stuff that Bren Brown teaches, you know, all the things that we've talked about, like all of those things are basically harnessing that neuroplasticity and using it in a way that helps you get to where you need to be.
Wow. Yeah. I need to just keep, now I'm like, I need to know more.
Yeah.
Like I want to know more. So I just need it to just, you know, marinate for a while because it's a lot.
Yeah,
Today was a big day.
Yeah, it was.
Big day.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you for
Thank you.
all of
Thanks for
this.
having us in the discussion.
Thank you for tuning in to Alter Eagle. Join me every Monday for a new episode, and be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Follow us on Instagram at Alter Eagle Podcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay hopeful, stay kind.